morning, Lucy. How are you?
Hi, Lou. I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being here. This is the Rip and Page podcast. Delighted to have you here. How was your journey in?
Really smooth and glorious sunshine.
It is glorious.
Felt completely unreal.
It makes a difference, doesn't it?
We've just had kind of biblical rain every single day
Yeah.
for weeks on end, and today the sunshine is.
Makes a huge difference.
It makes such a difference.
I mean, I came in from Leeds. For anyone who knows the north, we're not blessed with great weather, so to come to London, it's a big day out.
Yeah.
Big day out for an northerner. This is the podcast where we have a coffee with the world's most interesting writers to inspire your reading and your writing, and it's all crafted and curated by me, Liam Bishop. Today, we really are having a coffee with one of the world's most interesting writers. We're having a coffee and a conversation with you, Lucy Caldwell. Delighted for you to be here.
That is, and that's such a high bar. Oh my goodness! But yeah,
Not at all.
I'm really happy.
You are though. You're very much. I mean, for reasons we're going to see, and I've read this short story collection, Devotions, which is published again by Faber, one of a long-standing publisher of yours. Mm-hmm. And I've read this collection a couple of times now, as well as lots of your work. And I revelled in the theatre troupe performing a choose-your-own version of Hamlet. I had a wry smile watching Christopher Plummer ponder on whether he really did love Julie Andrews. And among the many other stories, I've just continued to marvel, Lucy, at your capacity to meditate on death, existence, light, and love. Finishing, I genuinely could not help but feel that I was in the hands of a master of their craft.
Like, it's funny, I would never, ever use that word. Faber have
Which word, sorry?
The word master.
Okay.
All of its sort of connotations of, I guess, patriarchy or colonialism or superiority or, dominating something. If we kind of in keeping with the theme of devotions, I would see myself as a priestess of the form. Devoted to it. I would always think that my role is to understand and serve the story.
Yes.
And actually it's something when I'm teaching writing, it's something I say to the writers who work with me, some of whom are emerging writers, a lot of whom are, self-conscious or feeling, all the qualms and concerns about asking people to spend time reading their work. You think if there's a way of getting your ego out of the way, it makes it so much easier. And you just think your job, your only job, is to serve the story as best you can with all of your capacities. Your job is to get better enough, technically, emotionally, in order to serve the story. But I do see very much the short story practice as not, coming from not mastering, not penning something, but understanding and serving it. I think.
Well, I didn't mean to provoke. I just felt like that this was somebody really in a deep relationship with the form that could only come from experience, but insights and reading. And it was a singularity, I think, that I hadn't really felt in a long time and I think I don't know whether that comes down to what that comes down to we might look at, but in terms of perhaps there's too much power play in that word master.
Yeah, no, you meant it as a compliment, and I'm really grateful. I think what I think of is it took me at least a decade to write any story that had any sense of true life. I always loved the form, and by the time my first collection was published, that was Multitudes in 2016, I had written 3 novels, several stage plays, radio dramas.
Yes.
I have drafts of 2 or 3 of the stories in Multitudes that go back 11 years from their first draft at the time of publication. Because I just wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough emotionally. I wasn't good enough technically to get them to work. So I do feel that it took a long time for me to understand the form, and then even longer to understand what I might be able to do in it. So it does feel that I've been it's a form that requires but does reward devotion.
Rewards devotion. And Devotions is the title of the collection, obviously. But I think, I mean, your CV would suggest that you are pretty good at this, Lucy, if you don't mind me saying whether you're a master or not. But the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature, the George Devine Award, Dylan Thomas Prize, the Emerson Award, Susan Smith Blackburn Award, Irish Writers and Screenwriters Guild Award, Commonwealth Writers Award, the Kay Blundell Trust Award. You won the BBC National Short Story Prize in 2021 for All the People Were Mean and Bad. It sounds like we are in the hands of someone pretty exceptional at writing. But either way, we want to get into this short story collection. And we are here in person. We're here at London's Faber offices to chat to Lucy, and we are recording our conversation live. So delighted to be in person and here with you. And of course, delighted to welcome you to the Rippling Pages. Before we get going, don't forget, should never forget this, leave a 5-star review if you enjoy this or any other episode of the Rippling Pages podcast. Doesn't go for you, Lucy, but you are more than welcome to if you'd like to. But shall we get into...
like a sock puppet. Best episode, yeah.
There we go. And then I'll slip you £10 behind to do that. But I want to start actually at the end. I want to start at the end of the collection, because in the acknowledgements, I always say on the Rippling Pages, read the acknowledgements. If you want to get into writing, read the acknowledgements. There's a lot of information there about writing, because you describe this collection as something in keeping with 3 of your other collections. And you said it became clear in writing that you were writing something unfolding in real time, almost a single work that continued with openings, now joined by devotions. I wondered if we could just start with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Every different one of my novels, and I've published 4, has been completely different, standalone, discrete. With every book, every novel, I've been trying to do something consciously different. And when each novel is done, it feels very much finished. And it feels like I want, little more to do with it. It's done. But with the stories, they just feel different. Multitudes, as I said, it took years for me to tell those stories. And then I felt at the time that I had found a theme, and I wanted to follow that theme. And so I followed up the stories of Multitudes. Multitudes are stories of Belfast girlhood and young womanhood. My model was Joyce's Dubliners, but I was thinking, Belfast and young woman. And so, and it was about the parts of yourself that the multiple parts of yourself, and those parts of yourself, those versions of yourself that make it into adulthood, and those that die a sort of psychic death. So that was that collection. And then I wrote the stories in Intimacies, which were all about motherhood, motherhood. And that felt like a sister volume. It did feel that my characters, none of the characters in Multitudes are named. And none of the characters in Intimacies are named. And this was a conscious decision, because it felt almost distancing to name them. In a novel, I think if you're spending 200-300 pages with someone, you need to have a handle as a reader on who they are. But with the stories, I wanted the sense that I thought of it at the time to myself as, even though these aren't the same person, biographical details change, like someone might have a brother or 2 sisters or be an only child, I really wanted the sense that we could be seeing a cubist portrait of something. That's how I thought of it, a cubist portrait of girlhood, a cubist portrait of motherhood. And then with openings, I remember making the decision with my editor, Angus Cargill, my long-term editor, who's absolutely brilliant, phenomenal editor.
Why is that relationship so important?
That's so important to me because some of Angus's authors, he edits the work of Sebastian Barry, he edits the work of Kazuo Ishiguro, he edits the work of Claire Kilroy.
Right.
He runs Faber's crime list. He does a lot of very, very different authors. He marks up your manuscript in very neat, often penciled font. He is very clear, but very unobtrusive in his thoughts. I think that's why he's able to edit so brilliantly such different writers. He always is trying to work out what your sensibility is and how he can help understand that his and with the stories, he's particularly brilliant because I send him each story is so intense. I only ever have one story kind of open or live at any one time.
Okay.
You know, even if I can feel more in holding patterns,
yes,
you can only work on one. But I always I'm quite a private writer.
right.
I don't sort of send drafts to various people or into the world. But when I finish a story, when it's as good as I can get it, I send it to Angus and he edits it almost straight away. Like we're talking days, usually. And so he works on each story with me while it's still like malleable.
Yes.
You know, because what you find if you're working, it's almost like with a story, you've heated it up to sort of quicksilver.
Yes.
And past a certain point, you can't make any more changes.
Is that the real-time element then that you talk about?
I think so, yeah.
Right.
So he works on each story with me in real time. And yeah, and he really kind of understands what I'm trying to do. And with openings, I was thinking the collection, I'm trying new things, like geographically, it's different in range. Technically, yes. I thought, should I call it something different to signal that it's different? But Angus said, no, it is. They are the same body of work. The collections still feel open and alive, and they still feel that they're speaking to each other, that they are progressing. I love Helen Simpson's work. We're way overdue a collection by Helen Simpson, and she published for a while. We had a collection about every 5 years that went from, you know, 4 bare legs in a bed through Hey Yeah Right Get a Life, you know, through her characters would sort of grow up with the collections. Yes. Updike in his Maple stories. I love when he talks about the stories were written singularly, discreetly, individually, but then when you put them together, you get this amazing portrait of a couple and their lives unfolding over decades. Wow. And I love that sense that you can be creating something of which there's more yet to come, I think.
Which is interesting because I guess you don't see that until you put them all together, and that I mean that rewards a lot of rereading and going back. But is that reflection then in time that you've portrayed? Is that something that you've experienced? Is it coming from the experience of you going through time? And you talked about the way that your different parts of yourself grow up, and we leave certain selves behind, and we take some with us, and we communicate with them. And there's a lot of that in the stories. There's a lot of communications with different ages or eras that we sort of keep in ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. My characters, my stories, the first couple of collections did grow up chronologically in time, maybe. But recently what I've been finding is different layers of my life experience have become available to me as fiction.
Wow.
Maybe. I always think that with a story, it sometimes feels like the life force of a story feels to me sometimes like a sort of magnet, you know, and the magnet, different parts of you, your thoughts, your experience, your imagination, things that you've accrued, collected, absorbed, they are suddenly charged and the story suddenly demands them. And I always think, you know, I love that phrase of Yeats from The Circus Animals' Desertion, you know, the rag and bone shop of the human heart.
Right.
And I think we all are. We're each this particular, you know, amalgamation of all the kind of random crud that we've lived and done and seen and thought and whatever. And it's all totally inert, except when a story demands it. You know, so suddenly you will realize that something, some detail or something is required by a story. And sometimes as well, you know, with the opening story in this collection, it's a story about a young experimental theatre company taking their punky production of Hamlet to New York. And I realized in that story, it's the first time I've written anything of even coming close to my own university experience. You know, I had 3 very intense years at university, and I have never written a word of it. And suddenly it was as if the story, and I've never really written about my life in theatre. You know, I had a whole life in London theatre that I loved, and I no longer write plays and I miss it. But suddenly it felt that there was something in me that was able to go there.
Yes.
Maybe almost like I always think there's no, Wendy Erskine is brilliant on this, that there's no such thing as when people get backstory wrong, it's when they use it as a way of sort of filling the reader in and stuff, you know, as exposition. But I think that we never live our lives in terms of backstory, you know, and things, you get this in Alice Munro, things surface when someone is in a position to understand or forgive or release them or reappraise something that's happened. So I think, there's something of that in these stories that I felt, different parts of my own life becoming available, maybe.
Definitely, I think that's really interesting, and you've spoken there a lot about this sense of a feeling, a magnet, an attraction or a pull towards writing that story and it becoming available to you. And the story, the first story about choose your own adventure version. That's quite hard to say. Choose your own adventure version of Hamlet. Is there? So if anyone remembers when they were young, the choose your own adventure books, you'd read and then you get a choice whether you read this page and that will lead you a certain way, or you read that page and that will lead you another way. And usually, one led to either you getting killed or
most of the time,
and they've tried to impose this form on a version of Hamlet, and it's the narrator says that those books, they're called choose your own adventure books, they reward action. Inaction was impunished, and your only hope was to push through and seize the narrative. I just wondered what this idea meant, and if it meant anything in relation to that idea, that attraction of a story being available to you. Perhaps just some of the themes of inaction and seizing the narrative, seizing the moment in life more generally.
Yeah, I love those choose your own adventure stories. There's something that I used as well in my story, All the People Were Mean and Bad. I have a paragraph there where the protagonist of that story, it's second person story, but she's remembering her cousin who had died, and the way she would read these books really cautiously, and her cousin would just be making the most radical decisions, and her cousin has died. Maybe her cousin has lived her life the way she lived her choose your own adventure narratives. But I'm really interested, and I find it really fun the way those choose your own adventure narratives, they're asking huge existential questions of free will in a kind of contained space, basically. And so I find it a really fun way. Like, what I love doing, what I think writers have always done really, is finding new ways to tell old stories and finding new stories that belong very, very particularly to our place and time. So I love having like the fun of, a choose your own, the sort of concept of choose your own adventure stories to think with, and to think, how does this allow me to talk about action or inaction or free will or predestination or finding a way through of the ways that are available to you.
Why Hamlet? Why impose that on Hamlet?
Well, I mean, Hamlet is that great. Hamlet is a great play. It's the sort of thing that's said about Hamlet quite often is that he's paralyzed by inaction. But actually, when you read the play, you see Hamlet is always trying to work out, is another way possible? And is he trapped by the role that he finds himself in? Is he trapped by his name? Is he trapped by the demand or the curse that his father puts on him? Like, what might be the way out in that play? The play within the play. All of that play, I think, is asking those big questions about our consciousness and free will, and what does it mean to understand that we're trapped, even as we are trapped. And also all of these things, these are all the things that my characters it's funny, if I was doing a version of Hamlet, my version would be a sort of feminist take on Gertrude and Ophelia. Like Ophelia, brilliant character, kind of underwritten. Some productions have Gertrude murdering her, or they have Gertrude instructing soldiers to murder her. If I was doing a production of Hamlet, it would be the woman that I would be interested in looking at. I'd be interested in Gertrude. Is she in love with her husband's brother, or is she trapped and paralyzed? And has she always been? Is her husband a tyrant? Has she always loved his brother? Did they murder him? Is she happy now? Is she terrified? Has she submitted to him in a kind of coercive way? I would be doing all those things. But when I said, before, that this story, it isn't about me, it's my characters. And so their version of Hamlet is not necessarily one that I would do. I didn't even know if it would work on stage, really. But this is,
I'd like to find out.
Yeah, these are the questions.
But if she plays with
that,
she plays with that, will this work? Won't this work?
Yeah.
So you put in that self-consciousness into the writing of it, And I find, it's such a interesting. It's also that kind of pulpy element of fiction and culture applied to very, it's not esoteric, but very high art, historic. And you're very good at that, and you love, you seem to love incorporating. There's lots of pop references as well, and music, and it's that idea of interpretation and that idea of misinterpretation is fundamental, isn't it, to Hamlet, the play, and between his mother in particular. And I just wondered, your stories are about relationships and about how we interpret other people. And I wondered, perhaps it extends from that question of Hamlet and his mother, and perhaps how you would rethink Hamlet if it was yours. I think I'm asking, where do displays of affection and love fit into this? And do we have choices over them, particularly in some of our relationships we have with significant people in our lives?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And in a way, devotions, it's all about love. It's all about, the title actually comes, and Liam, you picked up on this. I have a previous story in my collection, Intimacies. The penultimate story is called Devotions, which is kind of either very confusing and a bad mistitling or an Easter egg.
I love it. I don't know what it means. Maybe we don't.
So that
Do you know what it means?
I know what it means, yeah.
Okay.
So that story, I remember I was writing it, and it's a story, it's a sort of story I think of as like freewheeling thought in motion.
Yeah.
There's hardly any character. There's hardly any plot. What it is, it's a journey. It's a journey of 4 people literally driving from Yorkshire to London, back to London where they live. And I've been working on this for a while, and it's sort of it's a meditation on time and belonging and all sorts of things. And I've been working on it for a while, and it wasn't working. And then I remember I was doing an event for Being Various, an anthology that I'd written. I was in a hotel in Dublin. My daughter was very young at the time. She was 18 months. My mum was there helping look after my daughter. And I still have the note that I scribbled on one of those little pads of hotel paper with a hotel pen. And it was a line about, we get to choose in life what is most sacred, and we must do our best to honor that. And I realized that's the missing thing for me. It was like, suddenly it was like a tuning fork or something. I heard the note that story was trying to write. So I went back home after that, and I very quickly was able to rework the story. I could hear the music of it, and there's a line in that story to that effect. It says, we get to choose. And in that story, the love is kind of like, bell hooks definition of love is a verb, love is a doing word. And in that story, it's talking about the knitting of a cardigan for a baby, which is what my mum did, being an act of love. And it's talking about the sort of quotidian measures of things.
Yes.
And so in this collection, Devotions, I kept on thinking about that idea of, we get to choose what is sacred to us. Because I think when we grow up, we outsource that. We outsource it to systems, we outsource it to maybe religion or to our parents or maybe to our peers. And we desperately want to be told what matters and how the world is and how we should behave and what we should believe. And I think what you come to realize, or need to come to realize, is that only you get to choose what is sacred to you.
Wow.
And you have to honor that. And it might look different for every single person, but you have the right and you have the responsibility to honor that which is sacred to you and what you mean by love. And it's, when I've finished writing this collection, I have Hamlet in there. Yes. I have Joyce's great story, The Dead. Yes. I've got Beethoven. I've got Ram Dass. It's just like, and it wasn't that I intended the collection to be super literary, Sound of Music. Yeah. I think I was just needing to use some of the greatest writers or artists that we've had to engage with those big questions. Wow. About,
does that help?
What is love? How do we love? I think so. Okay. I think if you,
because some of those people weren't great lovers themselves.
No, but in their work, that's what they are. That's what they are. Entangling with. That's what they're trying to work out, and of course, then it's really interesting, isn't it? The gap between the best of us and the kind of messy reality of how we live our lives.
Yes, and love is very performative in these stories, and I don't mean performative in a it's not fakery, it's not an act, but it's a very gesture driven, and you see people performing what look like acts of love. I would say love is not always expressed in words, I don't think. Especially when this is going back to your previous collection, Devotions. That whole, the passage that made me think about that, made me think about Devotions here, is the one where the mother sat in the car, they're driving home. These offerings, these devotions, banal and endless, our days going round and rushing from under us, the measure of love. The child's in the back, the husband's gone upstairs to put the heating on. So like, and it's very, very tender, very, very touching, and it's not a big declaration. And to me, that's what I felt was. It's just, for me, I felt like it was exposing those, as you're right there, banal moments in life that really show who we are.
Yeah, and that sort of a thing that I was thinking as well, that carried on from that note I found in Devotions, the story in Intimacies, into this whole collection, is that idea of finding the numinous in the quotidian. You know, I'm not religious. I'm fascinated by religions and by theology and by systems of belief. And I'm fascinated by the ways that, you know, we all do have to find the things that matter in the quotidian, you know, and it's funny, as you, I've noticed it having children, the thing, everyone says, you know, your children grow up so fast, and you realize that all the things that people say are true, you know, they do grow up so fast, and then you reach, you know, 40 and you realize, how am I suddenly, like, how's time happened? And I imagine it's just, you know, you speak to 80-year-olds who say the same thing, and our understanding of time, I'm kind of obsessed with. And any, you know, most of the great religions, most of the great mystics, they will say that it's in the here and now that you have to find meaning. You know, you can't wait for meaning to reveal itself. You can't wait for the narrative in retrospect to become clear. The only thing we have is what we can make of this present moment, and the sort of the meaning and the holiness that we can find in it now, you know.
Yeah, and you are so skillful, you're so brilliant at depicting that in, you know, across your oeuvre, those moments where life seems to speed up and people don't realise that people have changed and moved on. You know, I think back to your play Leaves, some of the, and it really struck my inner my inner teenage child. You know, when she's saying to her mother, I don't want you here. You make it, whatever you're saying is making things worse. Yeah, and it's really, really sad, and it feels really cruel at the heart of it. But this is what happens. You know, this is what happens in life, isn't it? People change and move, and I think so. When you're saying we have to find meanings in the here and the now, are you trying to depict your characters trying to find it, or have they found it?
So most of them are trying, most of them are seeking, some of them momentarily do. But the thing that I'm interested in, you know, I'm in, like, when you talked about the pop culture stuff, like, I'm interested in the ways that you find it on YouTube, or the ways that you find it on social media, or like, you know, I don't see that stuff as any lesser, or that's the, I have such a fascination with, like, the quotidian stuff. You know, like the way Frank O'Hara puts Coke bottles into his poems and all the rest of it. It's like, you know, this is how we live our lives. This is the stuff. This is the stuff I have to work with. You know, and you think, I always think if Chekhov or if, you know, John Donne were writing now, they would be making use of everything that we have. You know, it's that thing that you're reaching, a sort of metaphysics is reaching for the things that you have around you to make meaning, or to see things in you.
I would love to see Chekhov watching Love Island, or going on YouTube to, you know, listen to. Well, talking of pop culture, you know, talking of Ophelia is very much in the cultural consciousness. Very popular song at the moment by Taylor Swift, and she's reworking it in her own way. And I think it is the layers and the textures of culture and life, and what we reach for, I guess, maybe to find meaning, that help us. I was coming down on the train today, and I was reading Multitudes, and the epigraph is from Van Morrison.
That's right, yeah.
And I was coming in, and I was, there's a thing you can do, I guess, with your writing, is that you can try and get into your space, perhaps, or understand perhaps why these references were so important. And it's a beautiful song, Astral
Weeks.
Yeah, and the sun was rising over. As I was coming to London, it was a beautiful moment.
Funnily, the man beside me on the train on the way down, he had
not Van Morrison.
Yeah, he had earbuds, and they were really leaky. And I was kind of annoyed and trying to concentrate on the book that I was reading. And then suddenly it was Brown Eyed Girl playing, and so I listened to the whole of it through his leaky earbuds, and the sun was shining.
It wasn't me,
and
was
I just
it?
thought it was that. No, it wasn't you. He was a couple of decades older. But I just thought that was so funny, and I'd been kind of annoyed with him, and then suddenly it was like the sun was shining and there was a gift. You know, it was one of my favourite Van Morrison songs.
The uncanny, isn't it? I like, well, that's meaning revealing it to yourself, isn't it?
Revealing it. Or it's that, I always find myself caught between the fact of, to what extent do we live in a world of signs and symbols? This is kind of the thing that I'm wrestling with in the new thing that I'm writing, because, on the one hand we don't, and on the other hand we do. And if you're a writer of stories or novels, you're creating this kind of hermeneutic world in which everything is meaningful. And I always think, what would it mean to live life that way, or to see life that way? And if you're living it through a particular prism, then the meaning is created for you. But if you're living it sort of outside those traditional structures of religion or whatever, how do you negotiate all of that? And then Van Morrison comes on, and you can choose to take it as a sign, and you can kind of smile and think, okay, I'm not going to be annoyed at this man and his leaky earbuds. I'm going to think, okay, here's my favorite song, and I'm getting to hear it unexpectedly. It was funny. After that, I didn't even notice I was smiling. My mood had lifted, and his earbuds didn't even bother me.
That is uncanny, isn't it? Okay, well, we're going to have a quick break on the Ripping Pages. We're going to come back. We're going to talk more about devotions, perhaps more about some of the pop and cultural references, but certainly more about your fantastic work. Did you know that there is a Ripping Pages Patreon, and for a small monthly fee, you can get exclusive member benefits, including Ripping Pages merchandise, specially curated craft insights, exclusive reveals of upcoming guests before anyone else, and you will also get a shout out on the show, which brings me to the latest subscribers that Lucy and I are going to give a quick shout out to. If you don't mind, Lucy.
With pleasure. James Spicer and Elena Barham.
Thank you, James and Elena. Rob Lockyer-Greer, Pete Kowalczyk, and of course Ian Higgs, who's been here from the start. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Ian.
All right, let's get back into it. Let's get back into Devotions by Lucy Caldwell. Okay, well, welcome back to the Ripping Pages. Welcome back, Lucy. We are here talking about devotions. And so we've spoken about this idea of characters trying to find a higher meaning. And you spoke just before the break about the cultural references, whether that is high or low. I just wonder if you could talk about A Family Christmas, because it seemed really apparent in there that this was a challenge for the characters, and especially at a time called Christmas. Christmas, we're also looking for that, perhaps what Christmas means and family meaning and Christianity.
So A Family Christmas. I was making a program for the BBC on beginnings and endings in fiction. It was a really special program made with Chris Power, and should be still on the BBC website on the now defunct Open Book. And I was talking about The Dead, James Joyce's great story.
Yes.
And I read that, I know that story so well, but I was reading it, trying to work out, how does he do that? Like, that story is very long. It's, 15,000 words. It's almost novella length. And I was trying to work out, how does he do it? How does he get us all through these banalities of a family Christmas meal to the sort of cosmic swoop the story takes at the end? And then I was thinking, what would it mean to have a story like that today? And Joyce, he was a very young man when he wrote that story. Like, I think he wrote that story when he was 25. And in some ways it feels like a young man's story. The romance at the end, when Gabriel is saying of his wife, he thinks she'll never love him as well because she'll love Michael Fury, the boy who died for her. And I was thinking, what would that story look like, 100 years on? And what would it look like? That story ends with Gabriel's intimation, or his knowledge really, that his wife has all of these chambers of her heart that are and probably forever will be inaccessible to him. And so I wrote a story that I called A Family Christmas that's, I wouldn't say a version of, it's maybe in conversation with that Joyce story from an older woman's perspective.
Right.
About exactly what it means to carry this inaccessible world within. And I was thinking, or inaccessible to others, this sort of alternative reality. And I was thinking as well, Joyce was such a great Aquinas scholar. He was a lover of Cardinal Newman. And I was thinking, what in religious terms, 100 years on from Joyce, what would an epiphany mean? And so I was kind of thinking through all of these things, and I was working out, technically, how do you harness all those forces? How do you work with, Christmas and snow and angels and family? And how might you do a cosmic swoop? I heard, I was doing an event with Enright in Belgium, and she read a couple of years ago, and she read a work in progress that became The Wren. And there's a gorgeous passage in that about angels, and it does that Joycean swoopy thing.
Yeah.
And Anne read it for the first or the second time, and I remember just being sort of like open jawed. It was just an extraordinary bit of writing and reading, and it was feeling, again, how do you go from the quotidian? How do you go from the banalities of something? Like, how do you get up here?
Yeah, so good. But you're so good at that. You're so the register, the way that you sort of play with registers, and what I think is so interesting in how you craft it is that there is quite a quotidian voice to some of these characters sometimes that you let speak. You'll use sort of filler words. They'll just sort of they'll qualify things that this sort of happened. But then also within by the end of the paragraph, they are in a higher place.
Yeah, and I take a lot of care over. I was always very self-conscious when I was young. And I started publishing young, because all of the writers that I loved, like Virginia Woolf and Rosamund Lehman and Elizabeth Bowen, Sylvia Townsend Warner, Willa Cather, they're all such great stylists. And I always felt, I'm not a great stylist. I'm no good with metaphor. There are so many. I'm not really that good with description. But what I can do, and I think this comes from my musical, I played violin I learned violin when I was about 4. I can hear very precisely the rhythms.
Oh, wow.
And I always think of my stories in terms of tone and pitch. And so I always try to write a sort of prose that, if a sentence seems pleased with itself or calling attention to itself, I always edit it, because I want there to be a sort of simplicity that allows something to build, allows the story to get somewhere without the reader realizing where it's going. Or just as you described it, I want the reader to realize they've suddenly been taken somewhere and they haven't quite seen it coming, or they've been allowed to be unselfconscious. If the prose is unselfconscious, I think maybe the reader will be unselfconscious as they're reading it, and then I'll be able to take them somewhere
extraordinary.
And then suddenly you've covered some vast psychic distance, and the magic of it is you don't quite know how you got there.
Oh, gosh, that is extraordinary.
But if the sentence seems pleased with itself, or if the sentence seems signaling that it's good writing, or then the whole trick is the whole thing is broken.
God, that is, and it feels so powerful to watch you do that, and then to hear how you do that. It's
and even the things like you say, the sort of little filler words. Yeah, sure, they're filler and they're a gestured realism, but also if you're very attuned and attentive to the rhythms of your prose, they're doing something. They're not inert, they're not just filler. Because sometimes you think the ways that people speak, the thing is conveyed despite their words, but also through and with their words. So you're trying to work with, or I'm trying to work with all of that.
And that's what. Going back to Hamlet, that is about matter. What I can't remember the line, the very famous line about matter of what's the words are given matter, language is given.
That's right, yeah.
A material, and but all that thing that Chekhov does is you can't see it happen on the page, and all of a sudden you're in a different place, and this is what I felt like reading your stories, and this happens particularly in the final story about the equinox, and it is that which is the title story, Devotions, and it is that. Well, there's a few things here. There's the mother figure, which is apparent in a lot of your stories, but it is that movement, the great psychic movement, as you called it, which goes very far in a very small space of time, despite the characters not moving anywhere at all. And it is absolutely astonishing writing, and I can't express, and I don't know what the feeling is. You're talking about putting language to things. I couldn't put words in. It's the part when you're talking about when she's when the mother is talking to her son, reading in bed to him, and she tells him your son too old to share for Santa, feeling the lack of it all in the run up to Christmas in ways he can't quite articulate, in ways that make you ache for him and ache too for when it is simpler. And then there's a section, and perhaps we can get you to read it at some point, but by the end of the paragraph, you were talking about the forces beyond them, both of higher order, wild magics outside the bounds of our human reality, beyond the endless binary struggle. It is extraordinary, and it strikes me on such a chord within me somewhere, and I don't know what time in my life, but it's a beautiful piece of writing, and that is, this is why I felt like maybe master is not the right word, but it's special. It's really special.
Thank you. Yeah, that story, it's again, I'm doing sort of a lot of the things that we've talked about. That story starts with someone watching the live stream of the winter solstice at Newgrange. So Newgrange is Ireland's, it's an ancient Neolithic monument, a whole site, a whole valley, Brunabonia, of passage tombs. And this particular passage tomb is, it's older than Stonehenge by 7 centuries, older than the Great Pyramids of Giza by 4. It's really, really ancient. And
where's that, sorry?
At Newgrange. So
okay.
It's in the curve of the Bowen Valley. So it's on the east coast. It's maybe sort of just in from Dublin.
Oh, it's on the is it in the
near Drogheda, near the main city of Drogheda. And what happens at Newgrange is they discovered in the 1960s a tomb was excavated, and for maybe a handful of days around the winter solstice, a beam of light will enter through this, they call it the roof box, and it'll go like the stone passageway into the passage tomb is maybe, I think, 19 meters long, and a beam of light at the moment of the rising sun will completely illuminate the passage. It's really extraordinary. And you can go there. They have a lottery where you can apply for a ticket and be one of the people that goes into the dark to watch for it. But in COVID, when people couldn't go there, they started live streaming it. And the live stream was so popular, they've continued to do it every year since. And I've been fascinated by, again, you think Newgrange has existed for, 5,000 years. For most of that time, there have been people going to mark the solstice there. But this is, again, one of those very particular things that it's such a sort of, to have an atomized, communal, digital experience of something like that is something that no other generation would ever have even imagined. And even us, like a decade ago, pre-COVID, would we have imagined that you could participate in something? Probably not. So I'm really interested in that. And also it's an inward journey. And that's one of those stories that there's not really any character, there's not really any plot. So technically, what I had to do with that story is there's a very tight time frame. I have to use time, pull it very, very tight. Very, very tight chronology. And also the sort of shifting emotional contours of the character, unnamed, need to be done really precisely so that even a small shift can feel epic. And this is something that Edna O'Brien says of Chekhov. She says that Chekhov can make even the desultory dramatic. And I think about that often. And I think about how maybe one of the things that you need to do if you're any good as a short story writer is sort of corral the symbolic realm. so that objectively, a beam of light appearing on the stone floor of a chamber to a woman watching it through a phone hundreds of miles away, like objectively, that doesn't mean anything. But what you have to make it mean is it's a matter of psychic life and death. So you're sort of holding these forces in tension. It means nothing, and at the same time it means everything that this beam of light happens. So, and if you're working on there's something about a scale or proportionality, that if you are working on a tiny scale like that, it allows you to talk about huge things more easily and more appropriately. So there's sort of huge metaphysics in that story, and
there is, yes, but there's
but it's very specific and precise and
right,
grounded,
okay.
I think. Yeah.
And it's that transition in life that she's witnessing her son becoming older, perhaps, or
yeah, I think so.
And considering where your stories have come from, I know you've spoken at depth about some of the stories around your own son's birth, and I just think it's just that witnessing of people changing in a moment in time, and it feels like how does that then relate to what's happening there? So the seeing the light and seeing the beam, how does that relate to this idea then of who we are and how we communicate with ourselves and our past selves, as you spoke about a little bit earlier on?
I think what the story is,
because it's a very defined. Sorry to say, it's a very defined moment in time.
There's a very defined, yeah. There's and there's a line in the line from Dante that I quote. Funny, my very first novel is called, that I wrote. I was an undergrad at university, yes. And it's called Where They Were Missed. And that's objectively bad title because no one ever remembers it. But it came from my favorite poem by MacNeice that I had like printed and pinned to all the various rooms and desks and bedrooms that I wrote that novel in. And it's a poem called Selva Oscura. Funnily enough, I came back to that poem for the title of These Days.
Yes.
The line in that is, "These days, though lost, will be all your days."
Oh, she quotes it, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, Selva Oscura is MacNeice's take on Dante's yes. Divine Comedy, which begins with, Nel mezzo del cammin di mia vita. It's in the middle of my life. I found myself lost in a dark forest. And it's about sort of middle age and midlife and being lost in the dark forest and having to find a new path through. Yes. And so this is what's going on, I think, in that story. It's someone wondering what it means to not flee the darkness or to fight it, but to see the darkness as a portal and think where it might take her. And I think of all the great, like we have one of our oldest stories is the Sumerian myth of the descent of Inanna. Inanna, in Egyptian terms, she's Ishtar. She goes through all of these 6 or 7 gateways, and at every one she's stripped of her lapis lazuli necklaces, and she's stripped of her clothes, and she's stripped of everything, and she's hung on a meat hook, and she has to lose everything in order to be renewed. Persephone as well. We have the Persephone story where you need to go into the darkness, and we have, in terms of Newgrange, there's a story of Dermot and Grania, and that's death and rebirth, and so there's something, I think, that's happening in this story, that someone not fighting the darkness or not fighting a time of their lives when maybe you have to recognize that there's meaning to be found in the darkness, or that light only exists because of the dark, or that story is all about binaries and how binaries are false.
And have you learned that in life or through writing?
Yeah, I think that's something that I love. There's a lot of kind of Rumi. I love the great Sufi mystic poet Rumi. I have lots of his translations. I love his translations by Coleman Barker. And one of the things, Rumi talks about is how this is Chekhov as well. The Chekhov, the symbolism is kind of Christian. All human longing is really misplaced longing for the divine. And at some point, people recognize this and come to deal with it and understand that binaries are different facades of the same thing, of the same coin, or they're sort of they're different points of understanding the same thing. Like lightness and darkness it's easier to understand theoretically, I think, than it is in practice. But the darkness and light are the same, that it's only our perspective that makes them seem different. I think this is what a lot of the great mystics try to tell us in lots and lots of different ways. It's there in Eliot, it's there.
Yeah, and do you see that in your life, day-to-day life?
I think it's hard to, but I think one of the, like, all those great myths, they pass on in, like, writing, and when people learned how to make marks, that's a version of immortality, version of time travel, version of passing on important things, as is music, as is oral storytelling. And I think there's something, all these myths and the sort of stuff of religion, it contains for us really great and important stuff that maybe we can, I guess what I'm saying again is that we don't live our everyday lives apart from any of that stuff.
I think, and this is what I learned from your stories, is that there will be a moment in time where you will have to confront something that is challenging, dark, as we said, and you will have to try and find meaning in it. Otherwise, it'll become very difficult to get through. And you can't also strive too hard for that meaning. You just got to try and experience it, which is very difficult when you're in the moment, you're in the heat of the moment.
And see it as, like suffering or all these things, they are portals. You don't indulge in them, you don't seek them out, but they are opportunities. Like the bit that you quoted in that book, which is something I felt with my son, the agony of realizing before a child can quite articulate it, that the magic of Christmas is gone and they don't want you to be disappointed, but yet they're feeling it. And you think of the ways, there's a brilliant Oscar Wilde story about a king who doesn't want his daughter to know death. And so the high walls are built around the palace, and every night servants and gardeners have to deadhead all the flowers that are old and dying, and anyone sick or ill or old is banished. And of course, this is an illusion, and the princess realizes what is behind these dark walls. I have to go. And so she runs away to learn what is death, to learn what is decay. And you think, you can't, painful as it is, you can try to guide your children through these things, but they have to, you wouldn't want your child to be 50 years old and still believing in Santa, unless that was the version of their life experience that brought them most solace. So all these ways that it's painful to watch, but you wouldn't take away from your child the knowledge that lies on the other side of that painful experience. I think that's a really hard thing about being a parent.
Yes, I'm not
protecting
a parent,
and guiding through, and understanding that their life is entirely their own to live, and that they do have to go through all of these heartbreaking things.
And I think there's in some of your stories there is real sadness and real agony and suffering, but I found some of the really touching moments like those in Equinox. Those quotidian moments where you realize, I think, as we said, the people are changing, and there is it's a bittersweetness, isn't it? It is the darkness that we have to embrace and find meaning in, and a certain sense of pain, perhaps. We called it agony, but
in humor. And we were talking about Chekhov, and he's such a great comic writer. We have each other. We have, for whatever reasons, we're here in this time-space reality. We have the consolations of art, and we have wisdom that, through kind of incredible means is still accessible to us. And we have each other.
We have each other, and we do. We have your books, and we have literature. And we have you talking on the rippled pages. I think that's a great place to end our conversation, Lucy. Thank you so much for talking about devotions. Your new collection from Faber and Faber. We can hold a candle to your collection.
Yeah, we got very, very profound there, Liam. I think that. Well, thank you for reading the collection.
It's been my pleasure.
Deeply.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for being in person. I've truly enjoyed this. But I think for now, let's leave our conversation there. Obviously, we could continue, but I think it's time for us to say thank you very much from the Different Page, Lucy. Thank you for joining us.